Hey there folks, it's me TheTacticalBrit, and a recent discussion that's been going on in the community is the identity of Battlefield. A really good video by Jack Frags was made the other day discussing that the franchise seems to be heading in lots of various different directions that is making the overall feeling of Battlefield quite difficult, but more importantly making the future of the franchise very confusing in a lot of senses. There are lots of different people who have played various different Battlefields, and the franchise as we know it has been to a lot of different locations with a lot of different ideas, and it's really difficult to gauge what is Battlefield and what should the future of Battlefield look like, considering its very strange and often very confusing past. You know, we're talking about a game that went from the days of Battlefield 2, where it was very much a hardcore style military shooter, to the days of Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 5, where it's much more an infantry focused, seemingly more arcade kind of game. And these things are very much conflicting, and even older titles like 1942 and other various titles as well will show you that Battlefield has headed in a lot of directions, and each one of those games has fans, and because of that, the future of the franchise is quite questionable. Now, today I wanted to make a sort of response to that, a kind of response to this question about what the identity of Battlefield is, and a lot of this is opinion, but a lot of this is also just founded upon why I got into Battlefield in the first place and why I feel a lot of people have as well, and what makes it different and what is the reason we play this over other shooters that are available in the market. Because a lot of this sort of franchise changing towards a more infantry-centric game, and definitely in terms of Battlefield 3 towards a more Call of Duty style picture, is something that has happened, but I don't necessarily believe that this is something that people play Battlefield for. I think Battlefield in general is played for various different regions, and there definitely is space in the game for more than one existence of Battlefield. You know, one game can definitely encompass various different types of playstyles, and that's kind of what I want to talk about today. So how exactly do you gauge what Battlefield is? You know, we're talking about a military shooter? Are we talking about a bit more of a fast-paced style arcade shooter? Are we talking about something that's infantry-based like Bad Company 2? Are we talking about something that's vehicularly based like the based maps of Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 2? It's really difficult. It's not something that is a simple task, and I don't think choosing a direction for the franchise is particularly easy. But I think we've seen reactions to certain things that have made the franchise quite questionable, and I think we've seen lots of indications as to what people want from Battlefield that I think personally define it as a franchise. And the way I'm going to go about this actually is by taking maps. I'm not actually going to look at, you know, the in-depth mechanics of Battlefield. I'm not going to look at things like, you know, suppression, stuff like that. I'm going to be just talking about the maps of Battlefield that define why as a franchise we play it, and why personally I feel it's a game worth playing. The reason I'm looking at maps in this scenario is purely because, in my personal opinion, there are certain maps in Battlefield that truly encompass what people have come to expect from it as a franchise. And, you know, in terms of the sandbox environment that Battlefield creates, why people carry on playing it? Why is it that people keep logging into Battlefield 4 even now to carry on playing that game, and Battlefield 3? And this is a serious problem, as mentioned by Jack Frags, that so many people still play those old games. You know, how is it that you get them to play something new, and what is it about the franchise then that is missing now? And I think that this can be very well defined in terms of the maps you find in the game, and what picture of Battlefield those maps and those playstyles individually point towards as the franchise being, and what the franchise should do. I'm going to go back to Battlefield 4 because I feel like Battlefield 4 provided a really solid mixture of gameplay, and I think the modern environment, without discrediting Battlefield 1, is one that truly shows the sort of combined arms nature of Battlefield with helicopters, tanks, boats, and everything in between. Now, I'm not saying that it hasn't been done in other games like Battlefield 1, I just think it's more successfully done personally in games like Battlefield 4 and 3. And I think the first map I'd like to point people's attention to is maps like Golmud Railway, Paracel Storm, and providing a mixture of both Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4, the second Assault DLC, you had Firestorm, Caspian Border, and Gulf of Oman. Now, these are examples of wonderful maps in Battlefield, and I think the closest map that gets to anything like this in the current Battlefield 5 would have to be Arras, and basically nothing else in the game really comes close to those maps. Because these maps, in my opinion, encompass everything Battlefield should be. You've got these really great infantry-centric areas. You've got, in terms of a conquest layout, which is the bread and butter of Battlefield, you've got areas that are so heavily confounded in infantry gameplay, where battles and micro-battles can take place incredibly well and fluidly without and with the intervention of vehicles around them, and it's just incredible. You know, a lot of us will remember on things like, you know, Caspian Border, heading to certain objectives that were pure chaos, or heading towards certain objectives in Gulf of Oman, like the landing strip when you come away from the boat, where the sort of open ranges and everything just became pure chaos because there was these huge infantry battles. And the same applies to other maps as well, like Caspian Border and Firestorm. You know, there's these really great locations on Conquest where entire areas become completely war engulfed, and fighting for objectives feels really vital because that's where the fun and action is at, and getting to them involved vehicles, and getting to them involved working with your squad mates to get to these locations and perform really well. But what really makes these maps special, in my opinion, is the way they encompass combined arms and how they represent Battlefield as a franchise. You know, just thinking about things like Gulf of Oman and Caspian Border, Firestorm, Goldman Railway, and, you know, potentially other Battlefield formats like Paracel Storm, I think everybody can think of a moment where that map provided a sandbox Battlefield moment that made the game special for them and made it something worth playing. Whether it was, you know, C4 buggying a tank, or whether it was tank sniping a helicopter out of the sky, or whether it was, you know, completely wiping a squad with an Apache helicopter, or taking somebody out in a jet, or just doing something crazy on the ground in infantry like a mad kill streak. All of these were possible in one of these maps. You know, one of these maps catered towards infantry, it catered towards vehicles, it catered towards aerial vehicles, and even boats in some of the maps as well, like Paracel Storm. And all of them worked so incredibly well together. It was just this wonderful sandbox of locations where a war could play out between these various types of vehicles over objectives that provided some fantastic moments and interaction between them. You know, whether it was, you know, JDAM bombing a bloody tank with a helicopter, or anything in between, you know, completely strafe running somebody in one of the small helicopters like the ZH-11. These are the kind of moments that exist in these maps that don't presently exist in the current maps, in my opinion, in Battlefield 5, mainly because of limitations of the time zone, but also in terms of how the game has been designed, in my opinion. And just on the whole, these are the maps that I'd say this is the identity of Battlefield. If I were to take conquest layouts of certain maps, I'd say this is what Battlefield's about. It's about a combined arms experience within a sandbox that can truly give you a sense of scope and scale. You know, you're playing an incredible battle between 64 players, it's action-packed, it's intense, there's some incredible scenery, and every once in a while, or every other game, you see something that makes you go, wow, that's why I play Battlefield, you know? Whether it's something really cool that you do, or something really cool that you see somebody else do, that's why we carried on staying, and that's why we carried on playing Battlefield 4 to our heart's content, and that's why with the backup of, you know, a really good progression system and customization, you could sink hundreds of hours into the game, and you wouldn't even really notice. And then looking back to Battlefield 3, we have really great examples as well, some of which are even more catered towards infantry. We have Sen Crossing, we have Noshar Canals, we have Karg Island, Grand Bazaar, Damavan Peak. You know, admittedly some of these, like for example Damavan Peak, were mostly catered towards infantry, but they were really great sandbox experiences where things could go incredibly well. It gave you this wealth experience, and I think in my opinion, the Aftermath DLC did a fantastic job. A really good job of showing how both infantry combat in the game doesn't necessarily mean that the all-out war experience that we expect from Battlefield has to disappear. You know, Aftermath was mostly infantry based. There were a few transport vehicles around, to my knowledge as well, the odd tank here and there, but it was mostly vehicular based. But it didn't feel like another shooter. It never felt like it was trying to be anything else. It still felt like this large-scale warfare. And this brings me on to my next topic, and this is talking about, you know, where infantry combat fits into Battlefield, because this is something that seemingly the franchise is heading towards, and I'm not necessarily saying that that is a bad thing. In my opinion, Battlefield will always be combined arms. It will always be tanks, helicopters, planes, boats, people fighting together in these great sandbox experiences. And I mentioned some of the maps like Caspian Border and Operation Firestorm that I feel do this incredibly well. But that doesn't mean the game can't have the odd grind map. It doesn't mean the game can't have the odd infantry map that's really great. And it doesn't mean that these experiences have to be excluded to show what Battlefield it really is, or included too heavily to dampen down the franchise. I think there really can be a good balance of these things, because we only had really two grind maps in Battlefield 4, and that was Operation Metro and that was Locker. And those two maps existed because people wanted to get ranks, and they also existed because of the pure chaos of the game. But I think we saw in Battlefield 1 that trying to bring that chaos to a large scale of maps that were mostly open, featured these chaotic landscapes and pushes, wasn't successful. I think it frustrated people, if anything, because you go to those maps for those specific things when you're feeling those specific things, and for most people that's quite rarely, for some people that's all the time, and for some people they don't want to go near those things at all, and for some people it's all they will play. But that doesn't mean it has to dominate the franchise, and in my opinion, having just two of those grind maps in Battlefield 4, included the DLC, was perfect. There was no need to have any more. It had a great number of combined arms maps and theatres that worked incredibly well, but that doesn't mean that we should discount it as an experience. It is something that should be in the game, and I think Devastation is a great example of people looking for grindy style infantry experiences that are really fun and enjoyable to play. And even the Close Quarters DLC of Battlefield 3 showed that that was something fans enjoyed. I personally thought that that was a great DLC, but the reason I thought it was a great DLC was because if I didn't want to carry on playing Close Quarters, I didn't have to, but I knew it was an experience available to me. And I think that was backed up by the fact that we had things like Armored Kill, Aftermath, and Endgame as DLCs that offered fantastic alternatives. So in terms of answering what the franchise should look like, I think this step away from physicality that we've seen in the most recent patch has been a good step. In my opinion, having all of these various different animations isn't actually beneficial to the fun of the game. But what I really think is that Battlefield needs to encompass a fantastic combined arms experience in these open theatres of war that give us the opportunity to have great infantry fights on certain flag locations, but also don't neglect the fact that tanks, helicopters and planes and other vehicles also should be working in this ecosystem in a fun and enjoyable way that brings back the only in Battlefield Sandbox moments that we've come to know and love as a franchise. So troops, that's about it from me today, TheTacticalBrit. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.